the thing is, a lot of kids that I used to talk to would say that I want to be a pro athlete, but the average career for a pro athlete resembles mine. It's 3 years. It's not making enough money to reach escape velocity and live out all your, received wisdom from the world in terms of, what constitutes a successful and happy life. But by the way, that does not exist. The unhappiest people I knew were the people in pro sports that had everything.
This episode of the Power of War podcast is brought to you by SaferNet. For a full VPN experience coupled with antivirus, web filters, internet controls, and an internet use tracking console, SaferNet provides complete protection for your organization. Check them out online at safernet.com. You've tuned into the Power of War podcast with Brad Hawkins, serial entrepreneur and author of at least 3 books that I know of: God, the Devil, and the Internet, Unshakable Life, and The Power of War. And I'm Jim Brangenberg, your host, also a serial entrepreneur and an author of 3 books. I work for him, I retire for him, and she works for him. Our goal with every Power of War podcast is to provide a lively, unfiltered, unedited, unfettered, and unscripted conversation with a business person. We're going to explore their daily work and see if we can uncover a powerful war moment facing our guests. Our goal is to access the wisdom of God for the solutions that men seek. But of course, this podcast is sponsored by SaferNet.com. Tim Kohn is a former professional football player, financial advisor, husband, and lifelong learner whose journey spans elite athletics, career transition, and redefining identity beyond performance. Tim grew up in Wadsworth, Illinois, and lived to tell about it. He played high school football at Warren Township in Gurnee. Standing around 6'5" and 310 pounds during his playing days, he developed into a powerful offensive lineman and went on to play college football at Iowa State from 1993 to 1996. He was a multi-year starter, earned second-team All-Big 12 honors, and that would have been Big 10 back then, in 1995 and 1996, and was also recognized as an academic All-Big. I can't do it. It's got to be Big 10 back then in the mid-90s.
Big 8.
It was Big 8 back then? Okay,
yeah,
Big 8 athlete. It's Big 12 now, but that's just ridiculous because they allowed Rutgers in. All right, in 1997, Tim was selected in the 3rd round of the NFL draft by the Oakland Raiders, a strong draft position that reflected both his performance and potential. He later spent time with the Raiders organization and the Denver Broncos, navigating the highly competitive reality of professional football. While Tim never became a household NFL name, his career shaped him deeply. After football, he transitioned into financial services and built a successful second career as a private wealth advisor with Ameriprise Financial Services. He holds multiple advanced credentials and has been widely recognized nationally for his work. Tim is known for his humility, self-awareness, and humor about his journey. Today's conversation explores identity, faith, family, discipline, and what happens when the game ends, but life keeps calling. Tim Kohn, welcome to the Power of War podcast.
Well, thanks, Jim, and thanks, Brad. I mean, it just occurs to me looking at our screen that we're just a blue tint away from being a Blue Man Group tribute band, aren't we? I mean, it's kind of this actually would be a very fun group. So anyway, glad to be here.
Wow. Oh, that's awesome.
I'm going to work on that for the next podcast.
What an intro! What an intro! That's awesome. Oh, that's excellent. So, Tim, we just went through a very, very quick history, and now for everybody, Tim and I and Jim, we have the privilege of getting together and doing a Bible study on a regular basis, and there's a lot of people in this Bible study, and Tim and I have never really spent a lot of time really digging into the past and understanding each other from the past, and so how did the research do?
A couple areas maybe bearing some correction. Actually, I work for Charles Schwab, not Ameriprise.
Oh, you gotta be kidding, Brad!
And
how do you get that?
My gosh,
the Big 12 was never the Big 10. Rutgers is in the Big 10. The Big 8 was the kind of the Oklahoma, Nebraska, Missouri, Iowa State, Kansas State.
Oh yeah, because
I expanded to the Big 12 to include a lot of the Texas schools and things like that.
All right, Brad, maybe we should just redo the beginning of the show because that's ridiculous. Yeah, Big 8. That's it. Big 10 was with University of Iowa, not Iowa State. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. See, I grew up a Gophers fan, and college football is so humiliating. I just don't even admit that I was from Minnesota. And now I really don't want to admit I'm from Minnesota. But all right, sorry, Tim. Wow.
But, no, I mean, Other than that, I mean, yeah, I was drafted third round by a team that actually didn't even want me. They just wanted to keep me away from somebody else. That's an interesting story. But so, I mean, the funny thing though is that all those experiences, especially for somebody like me who didn't grow up knowing God, every God becomes way more obvious in the rearview mirror, in the hindsight. That's the thing that was kind of a powerful realization. Don't always understand what's happening in the moment, but things become clear with a bit of distance, and they also become more irrefutable. I mean, that was actually part of what brought me to Christ as a young adult, was just really having no secular means of being able to rationalize what happened, why they happened, when they happened. All those things that, frankly, it took more faith for me to try to cling to atheist preconceptions at that point.
Wow, that is excellent. So why don't we jump into what I'd like to look at as a rapid fire round to just quickly get to know you and understand a little bit how you think. So this should be a little fun. And just give me the first thing that comes across your mind when you hear the word. And so just a very simple, no rehearsal, no nothing. But the first word is football.
Iowa State.
Discipline.
Weight room.
Pressure.
Markets.
Identity.
Father.
Oh, good. Failure.
Football.
I thought he was going to say bio on the Power 4 podcast is what I thought he was going to say.
Humility.
Every day.
Nice. Family.
Priority.
Transition.
Life.
Success.
Nebulous.
And purpose.
Obviously that constantly changing. But purpose in my relationship with Christ is kind of the continuous thread.
Nice. Very nice. Well, thanks for doing that. It's just really good to go deep and understand really what triggers the different parts of you right off the bat. So, for those of you that are new to the Power of War podcast, the Power of War podcast is all about how do we stay curious during the journey of our life. And so we find ourselves in a place where a lot of times we get into a place of, like, for example, Tim, he could very easily have stayed in a place of saying, you know what, I'm a football player and that's who I am. And that's what the world knows me as. And at some point the career changes. And when the career changes, if you stay in that place, you're stuck forever. You get angry, you get bitter, you get frustrated, you get in a place where you don't move forward. But when you stay curious about where life is going to take you, and you allow God to speak to you in multiple different areas, you can say, you know what, I'm a football player, or God has something else for me. And that's what we're going to talk about here is how do we bring this to light? How do we get to the place where we understand those power of or moments when you can say, or there's something great coming. And so let's look at a little bit of your history. So tell us a little bit about your past. How did you end up in a place where you were walking into a pro football team, and what is the journey that got you there?
I would say that it was almost as unlikely a progression as anybody could encounter. If, in fact, it was so unlikely that it was the means by which God introduced himself to me. So as a kid, I moved around a ton. I basically lived in 3 different time zones within a 9-month span from like 3rd to 5th grade. And, that was actually very disorienting. It became hard to invest in friendships, invest in community, things like that. I moved around so much that I didn't really settle for more than a couple of years at a time until I got to high school in Illinois. So, and the problem was I was freakishly tall. I was 6'6" almost as a freshman in high school. I was always the tall kid with a head that defies all baseball caps, a size 8.5 head. You cannot, this helmet has no padding in it. and they basically put it on my head and told me to go out and play because it's the only way it would fit me. Um, so I was a tall, geeky kid where my shoulders were barely wider than my ears. If that visualization helps. I couldn't do a push-up. I was kind of spastic. I was always the basketball coach's best friend, though. They wanted a tall guy to go there and rebound and what have you. But it also made me very introverted. And I was blessed with pretty good academic capabilities, but that also seemed to, ostracize me a little bit in a lot of places. So I had a moment. I didn't play football till very late in my high school career. In fact, I was 16 going into my junior year, and kind of in a lost moment, I almost contemplated doing something kind of irreversible. Such was kind of the depth of my state at that particular point in time. Didn't believe in God. Grew up in an atheist household. Lapsed Catholics, perhaps. I mean, a couple generations back, but so basically, I didn't have hope.
So you were stepping into football. You said you almost went into something irreversible. What is that?
Suicide.
That is irreversible. So it was really difficult.
I didn't see a way out. I had no friends. I had no support network. I was actually so tall and awkward that in 8th grade, my history teacher used to join the other kids in making fun of me. They called me dictionary breath because I would, speak in 3 or 4 syllable words that seemed a little out of place for an 8th grader. So I was essentially, I had no social networks to draw from. I was top in my class academically, preparing for an Ivy League, type of stint, but I wasn't sure I was going to make it. And honestly, I wasn't happy. If it was just more of the same of what I was experiencing, I had no interest. And I basically just, like I said, I was at a point where, basketball didn't make me happy. I had no real friends on the team. And then just something, literally, I gave God an ultimatum. I said, I don't even know if you're there. I don't know if you're listening. But yeah, I hate you for what you've done to me. I hate you for
what age is this? What?
16.
Okay.
And I don't know what stopped me from doing what I was about to do, but I gave it one more night. And I woke up the next morning with an inexplicable compulsion that I could not deviate from for basically the next 10 years of my life. And that was, hey, you're going to play football. I'd never played football. You're going to start lifting weights. You're not going to be a spaz that's going to, can't do a push-up. That you're basically going to commit to this. You don't even know how, but you're just going to throw all your effort into it, and I'm going to pull you along. And I started lifting weights, from the most rudimentary, embarrassing, ego-destroying type of minimums that you could imagine. And just not letting that slow me down or my determination, what have you. I didn't know what force was acting on me until later. Like I said, things become more apparent in hindsight. And I went out for the team my junior year, barely able to bench my body weight. And I was a scrub. I was a backup. But I had a great experience, and I actually started to kind of come out of my shell, become less of an introvert, started, developing new friends on the football team that I didn't have on the basketball team. And then by my senior year, I kept lifting weights. I got up to about 250. Now I'm at 6'5.5", 250 pounds. Nobody's looking at me to play football beyond high school, but I actually, and again, I give all credit to God in hindsight, but at the time, I didn't really even understand what was happening. I couldn't deviate if I tried. It would take more energy and focus for me to go another direction from this than leading me. I was on rails. And I'm playing football that season, and all of a sudden, I'm playing against some of the best players in the state of Illinois that already have scholarships to Illinois, Wisconsin, all the big Purdue, Notre Dame, and I'm manhandling them. God's manhandling them. I'm just have my hands in the way. And
now, do you realize it's God at the time?
No, I'm still stiff-necked, but I recognize something weird is going on. It's softening me, and I actually start believing that I'm going to get a scholarship to University of Illinois because they were so impressed with how I've been playing. But that's where I wanted to go, and Found out that they didn't have enough scholarships, so I was really disappointed. They were under some NCAA sanctions at the time. So I really didn't know if football was going to work out. I resigned myself to Iowa State. And Jim, I know from our conversations, especially in our Wednesday group, sometimes the answer to the prayer is, I have a better idea. God's better idea was having me go to Iowa State. I hadn't heard of Iowa State. I barely knew what was in the Big 8 conference, like Jim. And so I knew Oklahoma and Nebraska, but Iowa State. And so, and I mean, I took that scholarship and I set up my dorm room, set up my TV, hook up my TV, and all three networks, on my antenna are showing me pigs at the same time. I'm like, what the heck did I get myself into here? Why am I watching pigs on every channel? Didn't realize it was the state fair going on. So there was kind of wall-to-wall coverage on that. But I thought maybe this is just what entertains Iowans. I had no idea. And
I think that's some of it. That's why as we grew up in Minnesota, we were always making fun of Iowa because, I mean,
there are 3 times as many pigs than people in Iowa. That's a fact. Iowa's a beautiful place. I would actually prefer nowhere else as home going forward. I'm fully bought in. But to condense this a little bit, at Iowa State, I didn't know where football was going to go, but that's actually where I met my wife, who is probably the greatest earthly evidence that God loves me, is my wife and what she brought to my life and what she's brought ever since. We're almost 29 years married now. And obviously the children that came from that. And
how many kids you got?
What's that?
How many kids? 2 kids. You could shout out to your wife too, by the way. She's got a name, right?
Oh, Shannon. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. She's and it's Valentine's weekend when we're taping this, right? So it's I don't mean to kind of put a timestamp on this, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say that. So college was one of those areas where I expected nothing but an education to come of it. And yet I was blocking for a running back who was a Heisman candidate 2 years in a row. So the few times that we were on TV were typically on highlights on ESPN where he was running and I was blocking for him. So all of a sudden I got a lot of interest saying, hey, this guy who's blocking for a 2,000-yard runner, he must be doing something right up front. And so essentially that basically led to me being drafted by the Raiders. And there's a story kind of in between there that I can get into, but basically, long story short, it's at the Raiders of all places. Essentially, kind of the NFL equivalent to Sodom and Gomorrah to some extent. And yet, you found some of the most on fire remnant of believers on the Raiders, and they helped me translate what I'd been coming to realize was God's hand in my life. I softened to the idea that there was a God, but I did not necessarily accept Jesus until I was actually on the Raiders. And I was baptized in our team hot tub. We have a giant hot tub at our facility. We did baptisms in that. And that was wild.
So Tim, how did you get to the place where you recognized who God was and said, you know what, I want you to be my Lord? How did you do that?
It's just the incredulity. There was just kind of a moment of clarity. Actually, before my first preseason game going up against Dallas in the hotel in Dallas. And I'm just really wrestling with what I thought I understood about the world and what was going on and why somebody like me, would be favored in this way, would have these opportunities, and what was really going on, because this was contrary to everything that I'd ever thought to map out or set up as ideals or goals or objectives in my life. And it was so improbable, for somebody as kind of physically behind as me to be at this point. And I really didn't understand the role that Jesus had until I had a mentor at the Raiders, Steve Wisniewski, who's perhaps the mightiest, champion for Christ that I met in my football. And the funny thing is, he was also known in the NFL as the dirtiest player in the NFL. He'd play to the echo of the whistle. Not when the whistle hit, but the echo of the whistle. So he'd run through guys and never really talked smack or any kind of that type of abusive language, but he let his play do this talking on the field. And he was just an incredible, mighty man of God. And he helped me understand, essentially, I didn't even have a Bible till he gave me one. And brought me into my first chapel service and discipled me and basically modeled the right way to live. And that's when the tumblers all clicked into place. That's when I realized why these mesh points weren't making sense, in my head. And it was just God conditioning me for that point. There was a progression the entire way. And God did not actually intend for me to be a football player. God intended for me to be his son, be reclaimed by him. And this was, given my absolute stubborn resistance, this was the way to get it done. And honestly, I can't imagine another way that he would have reached me. But it took infinite patience. It took infinite precise. Here's a better idea. Whatever you think is where you want to go for playing college, playing pro, whatever else. I only played pro for 3 years, off and on. I was cut 4 times in 3 years. God did not intend for me to be a Hall of Famer. God did not intend for me to be a household name football player. He intended for me to be a great father, a great husband, and to essentially learn about Jesus. And that's what it required.
Tim, I love that clarity. That is probably one of the most meaningful things that you've said, is that you've reached the height in sports that thousands of kids are dreaming for, that thousands of adults wish, and you were there. And yet you say that God's purpose was, for your life, was not to play football. It was to walk as his son. And that is probably one of the most clarifying statements. And God chose to use football to bring you to that state. God chose to use, something else for somebody else. But that point of clarity is just an incredible point, that if people would just understand the love that God has for them, that is just really exciting to be able to hear that. I'd love to be able to capture that for most everybody, because we love to put our identity into what it is that we do. Yet we are kings of the King of Kings. And that is probably one of the most meaningful statements. So thanks for sharing that. Give a little bit of a journey after you get to the place of understanding who God is. How did that maturity process go for you?
Well, you kind of gave me a lot of compliments about having that moment of clarity. God also understands I'm a slow learner. So I was cut my second year at the Raiders, and I did not take it well. But while my teammates are playing, I'm doing workouts for other teams. I'm spending about 6 weeks or so in just kind of a limbo. And honestly, I backslid. A lot of the things that I thought I'd kind of put behind me, essentially I was able to, unfortunately, I wasn't able to, resist them kind of reintroducing themselves in my life. And that's interestingly enough, when the Raiders signed me back mid-season, and I came back and got re-immersed into, that core group of 17 guys that, were my brothers that, we did our Bible study with. The interesting thing, though, is that I also got cut again the following year. Went over to the Broncos, got cut by the Broncos, and then was kind of in a little bit of a limbo there, and got re-signed by the Raiders, because the third time took. It wasn't the first time, it wasn't the second time, it was the third time before I truly understood what God was trying to do with football, and he repeated the lesson until I got it.
God's good about that. He likes that. That's a very standard thing. If we don't learn the lesson he wants us to learn the first time, usually the second time it's a little bit more difficult than if we just learned it the first time. And if we don't get it the second time, the third time is way more excruciating, so we can get to it and just learn what he's trying to teach us. I've seen that over and over again in my life. Like, Lord, I just want to learn it the first time, please. I don't like the pain of learning it the second time. And the third time, that's just what Dave Ramsey says, stupid on a sandwich. So
it probably provided a little bit of encouragement for me to see how many times it took for the Israelites to get it.
Well, they're still working on it, Tim. The Israel's still working on it.
That's the thing, is that there were some really kind of some strange lessons that I had in that process in the Raiders, trying to figure out, especially when you see how distorted life becomes when you're in pro athletics and different lifestyles that folks lead, and trying to keep your head. I mean, that's actually kind of the acid test, and to be exposed to that, but also it's almost impossible to do unless you have people who model the right way. And there were so many fantastic players, teammates, even coaches and chaplains on the team that were just a tremendous resource in trying to resist all those impulses and temptations that are just legion in pro athletics.
Making that transition, though, sorry, Brad, but making that transition, going from pro football, and eventually you're done, right? I mean, how many years? I mean, after you got signed on with the Raiders the third time, how many more years did you play after that?
Oh, and I mean that was it. I mean, I had a chance to sign on with the New Orleans Saints, but I thought I never want to be that sweaty.
You didn't like jambalaya? Okay.
No. It actually, honestly, I'm terrified of heat. I get heat stroke, heat exhaustion so easily. If you want to have me play in like below zero in Green Bay, I'll go in a half shirt. I'll be fine. I've got polar bear genetics, I think. So even without the fur. But yeah, I mean the heat and everything else like that. I was like, you know what? I've also got a lot of I had a lot of injuries. That was something that probably was a limiting factor. But I mean, I don't impose a limiting factor or assume a limiting factor on God. But so I mean, everything happened for a reason, and including the fact that even though I was a league minimum player, I didn't make a ton of money. I lost a lot of money in the stock market in the late 1990s when everybody else was making money. The .com era, when essentially the markets were going crazy. I was moving backwards and I didn't understand why. I wasn't paying attention. And when you get cut, you start thinking, well, gosh, my money and my ability to earn money in football is, very much finite. So, started learning that I got to do a better job taking care of my resources, being a better steward. But then I also figured out what my advisor was doing wrong, if not inappropriately. That unfortunately befalls a lot of pro athletes. So as a cliche. And I learned a little financial self-defense, but in the process, I realized, this is something where I might be able to help and bless other people. And at first I was just thinking, gosh, I've got a lot of teammates who are, getting exploited and taken advantage of. Then I realized I've got family members that were, getting bad advice and were being exploited and extracted from. And then I realized, I want to be in service to everyone if I possibly can in terms of helping with, their financial planning, wealth management, what have you. But then I also realized that there were a lot of firms that were interested in having me as an employee post-football were also the same ones that were fully on board with doing what happened to me and to other people. And so, finding the right values fit was a challenge for a couple of years. And there were some points in time where, again, it was a bit of faith with, regards to, Lord, I trust you. I trust you to basically take this where you intended to go. But those interim periods where there was a lot of uncertainty, where imagine a guy my size knocking on your doors trying to sell you mutual funds. That's a tough sell. I mean, where this size is an asset on the football field, it works against you in the era pre-Ring camera, doorbells, and just, hey, I want to tell you about the Putnam Fund or the American Fund or something else like that. And well, I guess they might be a little bit intimidated to say no, but I mean, they're not going to open the door all that often.
But let's talk about that.
I mean, finding my way to a place where, it was more of a values alignment where I could actually genuinely help people in a way that I would want to be helped in their place was kind of a key transition point.
So, Tim, was that transition difficult for you, being able to be in a place of giving up the whole, playing football, being on national TV, having a spotlight, to moving into a career of helping people with their finances? What was that transition like?
It's tough, but less so for me probably than a lot of other players, because you mentioned at the outset identity. For a lot of folks who had played a few years in the NFL, their identity might be football. And I said, father. At that point in time, I was a father of a young girl, and we hadn't had our son just yet. And they were depending on me. They were depending on me to, try to essentially, find my way. And it's a difficult transition. A lot of players fail. And I know it sounds like a high quality problem. But another one of God's blessings was that I emerged from football with next to nothing in terms of wealth and resources. So there was no temptation to just kind of ride things out and be complacent. And I know it's kind of maybe difficult to envision, but the worst situation I could imagine is being a 7 or 8 year player and having just enough money that you don't necessarily feel a great sense of urgency to begin a second chapter. And what's more is being 7 or 8 years removed from college, a lot of what you've learned from that stage of your life is, largely in shadows. You don't really recall and remember it. Gosh, I remember, by the time I got out of football, I wasn't even up to speed on the most recent version of like Microsoft Windows and Microsoft Office. So, I mean, there was a lot of relearning from my Comp Sci 103 class at Iowa State. So, I mean, it's a tough transition. I remember one of my teammates on the Broncos, who was, facing a career-ending injury after about 7 or 8 years. And I thought he had the world. I thought he had it made. I mean, he's a great guy. He had a beautiful family. Had awesome trucks, a terrific house. Everything that you think that you want as a football player. And he was legitimately scared because he's like, you know what, Tim, how did you do it? I don't. And I was like 3 years into my career post football. And he's basically saying, like, I might have 1 or 2 more years left, and then I got to, figure something out. And I don't really know what to do or what I'm interested in or what I'm good at. And there's a lot of insecurity among athletes in that regard. I mean, some of us don't even regard ourselves as serious academics or what have you in college. I mean, it's hard for us to get employers to take us seriously. Oh, you're basically all about football and fraternizing and all that other stuff. And so it's difficult to know how to be taken seriously and how to actually reinvent yourself.
It sounds like a great ministry opportunity. Former professional athletes who are trying to figure out their identity and their destiny after leaving sports. Because I'm sure, because when you wrap, I mean, it's not like you guys have a lot of free time during the NFL season. It's all you do is eat, breathe, and sleep football. And I don't even know how you have time for a family, but obviously you had time to have some kids. When you look at that experience, though, how did football and start at 16, when you started out in the gym working out, which, by the way, you never told us how heavy you were when you started, because you told us where you ended up at 250. Like, were you 150 wet at 6'5" when you started, or what?
Yeah. Well, my freshman year, I was about 155 pounds, 6'6". And then I got up to about 180 by my sophomore year. And then I got up to about 205 by my junior year, 250 by my senior year. I was about 323 when I went to the NFL Combine. No steroids, never took I mean, that's the other thing about, you want to talk about God and evidence. I was starting from the lowest of the low. God had a very low floor for me physically in terms of my athletic ability, but he blessed me with an incredibly high ceiling. And with work, dedication, you mentioned discipline, and I mentioned the weight room. Discipline was also journaling everything that I ate, including the ounces of water I consumed every single day, because there's no margin for error without the use of drugs or, excessive supplements and things like that. So I micromanaged that to the nth. And I got to the point where I was actually pretty strong. I'd set a couple Iowa State strength records. At the combine, I had linebacker level agility. So, for guys 323, that's unusual. And God blessed me with the athletic tools, but it just wasn't something where I was an intuitive or natural football player, really, if I'm going to be honest. I could have been coached. I could have been serviceable. I'm not sure if I would have ever been exceptional.
How did that discipline that God helped you learn help you transition and make you a great financial advisor today?
God basically taught me that nothing is impossible if you put your mind to it and you focus your resources on it and you're doing things for the right reasons. And even if I didn't understand what the reasons were in football. And, for example, in my career, I started in the industry at age 27. I was several years behind, most of the other folks that were getting their start in life. And I did not have a business degree. So I went back and got my MBA. I went back and got my CFP, CFA, and all that alphabet soup that financial advisors have. CPWA. I got another master's in international policy, kind of for the heck of it. God instilled in me just a sense that constant improvement. There's no finish line too far distant that you can't reach it. And I mean, it kind of reminds me the way that God, I would say, first made an unmistakable outreach to me was the before Christmas of 1996. I was just finished my senior year at Iowa State. I had a very severe ankle injury and I had other injuries, but I was supposed to play in a Christmas All-Star game, the Blue-Gray game, down in Montgomery, Alabama. They don't have it anymore, but I was broke and I was trying to buy my fiance, future wife, a Christmas present. I went to a Target, came out. I literally had $5 to my name. There's nothing in my bank account. I had $5 in my wallet. And there's the Salvation Army bell ringer at the front. And I say, you know what? I'm incredibly blessed. All these hardships, all these things that are freaking me out, making me insecure that I'm not going to perform well in this All-Star game, my injuries, what have you. I'm better off than so many other people. And I gave that last $5 to the Salvation Army bell ringer, and he handed me a little card. And I have it, unfortunately, in Iowa. I don't have it here, but it had a little Dalmatian and Christmas ribbon and a bell. And I opened it up, and it was Philippians 3:13 and 14. But it was only an excerpt of it. And what the excerpt was kind of important because where I was at in my walk or my emergence as a believer. Brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it. But one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal. It stopped at goal. It did not go to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. It was just toward the goal. And that was God speaking to me because I probably would have resisted something that was explicitly, tied to Jesus at that point in time. He was telling me to get over myself, get over my injuries, trust that things were going to work well if I just essentially put the past where it belonged and just focused on the present and towards the future. And literally, that's the only piece of scripture I owned, that card. So I took it with me to the Blue-Gray game. I was still hurting. I was still uncertain about how I would perform. I went to my first ever chapel service on Christmas Eve before that game. And I brought that card. Everybody else had Bibles. I had that card. And I didn't know what to expect. I prayed to God that essentially, this would become clear, that his will, would essentially be evident and irrefutable. And I had an amazing game. I played out of my head. I was up against Alabama defensive linemen and players and what have you, and I handled them. My agent called me ecstatic, saying, "Gosh, you showed up great, and it's going to probably improve your draft status, things like that." And I'm like, "Oh my goodness!" I mean, I can't just remain in doubt about what is actually happening, what has been happening, what is to happen, and so that was just kind of one of those, I would say, epiphanies that really began the final phase towards getting to know Jesus.
Hey, Brad,
so Tim,
go ahead.
Tim, there's a faith component that carries you through your life, which is an incredible gift. I mean, even when you were 16, you didn't know what it was, but the Holy Spirit was walking you through this journey. You end up going through football, and you find God, and you're starting to build a relationship. You move into your second career, and I spent 20 years running an investment company. I started it from scratch. I had many people working for me, and it's a big journey, and that entire world is not necessarily focused on Christ. It is a very greed-minded. It's a very selfish intent, and very you're tied to a lot of extremely self-centered people, and I know, living in that for 20 years, it was a journey of great success, and it's difficult to carry your faith through that. So talk to a little bit about how do you blend your faith into your financial management strategy, skill, your relationship with your clients. What is God using your financial services business for?
Well, and that's the other thing too, is that I could not work somewhere where my values, weren't in alignment with. I pray every morning before I go into work. God, just let me bless one person, at least one person, that I speak to or, come into contact with today. And I'm fortunate. The roles that I've been able to pursue, especially at Schwab, do not depend on me serving a self-interest in terms of, what actually gets done that day, what's accomplished on the client's behalf. It's entirely based on what's based in the client's best interests, and that's something that I find inviolable. God gives me a sensitive stomach lining and stuff like that, and lead away if I think that something is twisting my motives in a way that is not in accord with Him. So I actually count myself very fortunate. I've been able to, in almost every respect, find roles that allowed me to operate in that fashion. And the great thing about it is it truly actually liberates the best aspects of what I'm able to do, because I can be authentic, I can be passionate, and I really don't worry that, essentially I'm serving some other interests other than the clients in that context. And it's liberating, and it's energizing. And I constantly learn. God basically gives me a compulsion to keep reading and keep learning, because it expands my ability to help and to do good in this context, because there are many channels and avenues, and there are actually a number of kingdom advisors and Christian mentors that I was able to find in different firms and what have you, that were also able to show me how to do things the right way, to maybe confer and consult on hey, I'm not sure what to do in this situation, how does it hit you? And so, I mean, I don't think it's a lost cause in this industry. I don't think it's necessarily a pit of vipers, so to speak, but you do have to be careful. And I would say, you do have to, look for the right firms with the right, tone and philosophy towards clients. And I've been very fortunate.
That's beautiful. So we only have a couple of minutes left.
We got time for you to do rapid fire round 2, Brad. We do.
Okay, good. So let's do that. Are you ready to do a rapid fire?
I'm punchy, but cut me, Mick. Let's go.
Okay. So just like the other one, this is a little bit different, but give a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit of detail behind your thoughts behind this. But one thing that football gave you, what is that?
Christ, everything.
One thing that football took away from you?
Mobility.
It ripped your hair out too. That helmet without the pads took the hair right off your head.
Honestly, yeah.
A lesson that you learned the hard way.
I always, anytime I encounter adversity, I always despair. I always take a back step, but it becomes a gather step with God. So you gather step where you regain your balance. So I've learned that setbacks are temporary, and to trust God, and forward progress, is thereafter inevitable. So
a habit that keeps you centered.
Reading. But I mean, it's not just the secular reading. It's obviously reading the Word and giving priority. Like, that's the first thing I read, and then I go into everything else. So that I'm hoping that other things might hit me in that frame, in that context.
What faith means to you now?
What water means to fish. It's kind of tough for them to describe it, right? I lament and I feel bad for the kid that I was before age 16, before age 23, when I gave my life to Christ. Having that measure of hopelessness, having to endure that. But I also understand how formatively necessary it was. And so, I mean, faith is something that sustains me. And I've had a lot of setbacks. I've had a lot of reversals, a lot of transitions. But trusting God has never been a mistake.
And what does success look like for you today?
Gosh, it kind of feels weird at this stage of life to, consider what's, out there to be accomplished. But I guess the one thing I always feel like I'm a work in progress, that there's going to be some ultimate application of everything that God's put into me that's going to come into play. It's going to play a critical role in some aspect. and I just feel like I have to prepare for it. Sometimes, preparation is tough for me to focus on, and I wish I could say that, I'm never distracted. I'm often distracted. But I'm just knowing how patient God was in the past. I know that he's got infinite patience to put all of us to our best work, to our best purpose at any stage of life.
And one last question that I've got for you is when the people that you care about the most look back on your life, what do you hope that they see?
Generosity and mirth. Somebody that was hopefully always available, always looking to help. Somebody that was always hoping to maybe lighten things up, even when things weren't light inside for them, but to also be, somebody that, honestly, I want them to understand what being a Christian means to me. Even in contexts where I can't remember who actually said it, but in all ways preach, and when necessary use words. I want to demonstrate an example, although honestly, I know my tendency from the past that, there's periods where backsliding is possible, and essentially there's guilt, shame, reorientation, and rededication, and hopefully I'm a good example to those who knew me.
How about 30 seconds to that budding athlete, somebody that's doing really well in high school, or maybe doing really well in college, and they're chasing the dream? What would you tell them about identity?
That identify as a scholar athlete, not as an athlete. God wants you to win on multiple fields of competition. Do not limit it to sports. God can basically infuse that same power into your other pursuits, but don't limit yourself, and don't limit God to just attempting to be successful in one field of endeavor.
One of the big purple people eaters in the mid-'70s of the Vikings became a Supreme Court justice in Minnesota.
Alan Page.
Got to get that. Alan Page. Wow.
Well,
think about
and
that.
there's a lot of great success stories. The thing is, a lot of kids that I used to talk to would say that I want to be a pro athlete, but the average career for a pro athlete resembles mine. It's 3 years. It's not making enough money to reach escape velocity and live out all your received wisdom from the world in terms of, what constitutes a successful and happy life. But by the way, that does not exist. The unhappiest people I knew were the people in pro sports that had everything. And that God hole is not filled by paychecks. It's not filled by cars. It's not filled by debauchery. And that's why I met some of the most committed Christians I've ever met in any walk of life in that locker room.
Yeah. So meaningful. Tim, I got to tell you, I have just so appreciated getting to know you and hearing your heart. I love how you describe the journey of faith through the football journey that you've had. I love to hear how you give glory to God for the Holy Spirit experience when you were 16, and just seeing what the Holy Spirit did, giving you that drive to push through in probably one of the most difficult times of your life. And that is what I hope is that anybody takes away is to realize where the Holy Spirit's working in your life all the time, whether you acknowledge it or not. God is loving us so much that he will continue to help us through even our most difficult decisions. So anyway, Tim, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for spending time sharing your story. It is incredible. Jim?
Yeah, Tim, I also just want to thank you for sharing your story with honesty and humility. That was a powerful conversation about identity and transition and what lasts when the cheering fades. So thank you, Tim, for being with us today on the Power of War podcast.
It's a blessing to be invited and be able to share all this. I'm hoping maybe it resonates or tracks with somebody else who might be listening, even the young athletes or what have you. But I'm just humbled by the journey and just grateful to know you, brothers.
And if this episode resonated with you, our listener, please subscribe to the Power of War podcast so you make sure you get notified the next time we release another episode, and share it with someone navigating transition, undergoing a lot of pressure or change. But thank you for listening. And remember, you can be defined by the game, or you can discover who you are beyond it. Thank you for listening to the Power of War podcast with Brad Hawkins and Jim Brangenberg. We invite you to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, and Truth Social. And if you want to join us on the show, email me, jim@iworkforhim.com. We hope our discussion today has blown your mind and inspired you to live with the power of or on that mind, and for you to submit your business issues, your life issues, your identity issues to the one who has all the answers. This episode of the Power of War podcast is brought to you by SaferNet. For a full VPN experience coupled with antivirus, web filters, internet controls, and an internet use tracking console, SaferNet provides complete protection for your organization. Check them out online at safernet.com.